The rich aroma of carefully simmered fichu permeated the morning air, warm and familiar, a daily ritual Susan performed with practiced skill. For 10 years, this small kitchen, attached to their modest but well-tended home in a suburb of Northwood City, had been her domain. From here, she managed their lives, raising two active children, running a small but successful eatery from the front of their house, and ensuring Mark, her handsome, ambitious sales manager husband, had everything he needed to conquer the business world. People always said Susan was lucky. At 38, 3 years older than Mark, she wasn't conventionally beautiful. Life, 3 pregnancies, one sadly lost in infancy, and relentless work had etched lines on her face and added curves to her once slender figure. Her education was average, yet she had Mark. Charismatic, educated, a man whose smile could light up a room and whose career was clearly on the rise. Their life from the outside seemed perfect. A successful husband, a hard-working wife, 2 healthy children, Lily, their perceptive 8-year-old daughter, and Ben, their energetic 5-year-old son. But recently, a subtle chill had crept into their home, a draft Susan couldn't pinpoint. Mark worked later, his explanations vague. Entertaining clients, team activities, closing deals. His phone, once casually left on the table, was now always clutched in his hand or carefully stowed away. His touch, when it came, was perfunctory, his gaze often distant, skimming over her as if she were part of the furniture. Susan had tried to dismiss the persistent unease, blaming stress, his work pressure, her own fatigue. She was his anchor, his support system. She had invested her youth, her energy, even her small inheritance to build this life, to support his education in the years they had nothing. He couldn't. Today, however, felt different. A text had arrived while Mark was in the shower, an unfamiliar name, Nina, followed by the simple words, "I'm waiting." Susan's heart clenched painfully. Nina. The name echoed from a past Mark rarely mentioned, a past before Susan. His first love, who, from the few details Susan had gleaned over the years, had left him for someone wealthier just before he met Susan. Why was she texting him now? When Mark emerged, whistling, smelling of expensive cologne, Susan tried to keep her voice even. Someone named Nina texted, said she's waiting. His whistling died. For a fraction of a second, Susan saw something flicker in his eyes, surprise quickly masked by annoyance. Oh, her? Just an old colleague checking in, probably about next month's conference. Ignore it. He snatched the phone, his movement unusually quick, avoiding her gaze. The phone suddenly tasted bland. The warmth from the kitchen felt suffocating. An invisible crack had appeared in the foundation of her world, and Susan had a terrible premonition it was about to shatter. The call came 3 days later, tearing through the fragile normalcy Susan was desperately trying to maintain. It was Megan, her childhood best friend, her voice tight with suppressed anger and a hint of pity. "Susan, I don't know how to tell you this." Megan's hesitation was more alarming than any outburst. "I'm near the Horizon Hotel downtown, picking up that custom cake, and I saw him. I saw Mark." Susan gripped the kitchen counter, the damp cloth in her hand forgotten. "Yeah, he has a meeting downtown, Megan. He told me." "With her, Susan." The words were sharp like nails. "With Nina. They weren't having a meeting. They checked in. Together." I saw them go into the elevator, his arm around her waist. The world tilted. Susan couldn't breathe. No, Megan. You must be mistaken. It can't be. Maybe it just looked like them." "Susan, listen to me." Megan's voice was firm, cutting through the fog of denial. "It was them. In broad daylight. He looked happy. She was laughing. There's no mistake. Susan sank onto a stool, the phone slipping from her numb fingers. Megan's words echoed in the sudden empty silence. Checked in, arm around her waist. Happy. Each phrase was a hammer blow against the fragile facade of her marriage. The unease, the late nights, the distant eyes, they weren't products of her imagination. They were warning signs she had willfully ignored. For the rest of the day, Susan moved like an automaton. She served customers at the eatery, a fixed smile on her face, her mind reeling. She played with a lily and Ben, her laughter sounding hollow even to her own ears. She replayed Megan's words, searching for loopholes, for alternative explanations. A business trip? A misunderstanding? But deep inside, a cold certainty was settling in her gut. Mark came home late, a faint scent of perfume, not hers, clinging to him. He pecked her cheek perfunctorily, muttered something about a tough negotiation, and retreated to his study. He didn't notice her silence, her trembling Anne's, the unshed tears burning behind her eyelids. He didn't see the woman whose world had just been irrevocably shattered. He only saw the familiar, plain wife he had long since taken for granted. Hope, however irrational, died hard. Susan spent a sleepless night, oscillating between numb disbelief and a simmering rage. Maybe Megan had been wrong. Maybe it was a terrible coincidence. She needed proof, irrefutable proof, before she destroyed the life she had painstakingly built. The next afternoon, feigning a trip to the market, Susan drove towards Mark's office building around closing time. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She parked across the street, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, feeling like a cheap spy in a tawdry drama. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, she saw him emerge, effortlessly dapper in his crisp suit. And beside him, clinging to his arm, was a woman. Slender, fashionably dressed, her face alight with proprietary adoration as she looked up at Mark. Nina. They didn't just walk. They strolled intimately, like lovers oblivious to the world. They stopped at a street vendor's cart, Mark buying her a small treat, his fingers lingering as he handed it to her. Then, right there on the crowded sidewalk, under the indifferent gaze of passers-by, Mark leaned down and kissed Nina, a deep, lingering kiss that spoke volumes more than any hotel check-in. Something inside Susan shattered. The carefully constructed dam of denial burst, unleashing a torrent of raw, primal pain and fury. Unthinking, she threw open her car door and darted across the street, oblivious to the blaring horns and startled shouts. "Mark!" Her voice was a hoarse, unrecognizable croak. He pulled away from Nina, eyes widening in shock, then instantly hardening into cold fury. Nina flinched, then composed herself, a glint of smug challenge in her eyes. "Susan? What the hell are you doing here?" Mark's tone was sharp, accusatory, as if she were the one caught in a transgression. "What am I doing?" Susan choked out a sob, her hand gesturing wildly between him and Nina. "What are you doing? Kissing her? On the street? After everything?" "It's exactly what it looks like," Mark said, his voice devoid of warmth. He stepped slightly in front of Nina, a protective gesture that was another knife twist in Susan's heart. "I love Nina. I want a divorce." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Divorce. Just like that. 10 years. 2 children. Countless sacrifices. Dismissed in a single brutal sentence on a public street. The pain morphed into white-hot rage. Her hand flew up, connecting with his cheek in a resounding slap, the sound echoing in the sudden silence around them. Mark recoiled, touching his cheek, disbelief and fury warring in his expression. Nina gasped dramatically. Passers-by stared, whispering. Humiliation washed over Susan, hot and sharp, mingling with the agony of betrayal. She had slapped her husband in public. She had become the shrew, the hysterical wife, while he stood there, the wronged man seeking his true love. The irony was nauseating. "How dare you?" Mark hissed, grabbing her wrist, his fingers digging into her flesh. "We'll deal with this at home. Don't make a scene." But the scene was already made. The crack had become a chasm, and Susan knew with cold certainty that her life would never be the same. The air in the living room was taut, thick with unspoken tension. Mark's mother sat bolt upright on the sofa, her face a stony mask, her eyes darting between her son, Susan, and the woman huddled next to Mark, Nina. Megan stood protectively near Susan, arms crossed, radiating clear hostility towards the interlopers. Lily and Ben had been sent to Megan's house, away from the ugliness that was about to unfold. Nina, shedding the smugness Susan had seen on the street, now projected an image of fragile vulnerability. Tears welled in her large eyes as she looked imploringly at Mark's mother. "Auntie, please try to understand. Mark and we can't live without each other. We made a mistake years ago, but fate brought us back together. We truly love each other." Mark's mother's lips thinned. Fate? Or calculation? Her voice was dangerously quiet. "I remember you, Nina. I remember how you kicked my son to the curb as soon as someone with a thicker wallet came along. Now that man is gone, and suddenly you can't live without Mark? After he's built a life, a family, with the woman who stood by him when he had nothing?" Mark bristled, placing a comforting hand on Nina's arm. "Mom, don't talk to her like that. It wasn't her fault. Things were complicated. And what Susan and I had, it wasn't love. Not really." Susan flinched as if struck again. Not love. 10 years of shared life, small joys and struggles, raising children, her unwavering support, dismissed as not love. "Then why did you marry me, Mark?" Susan's voice trembled, but she looked him directly in the eye. "If you never loved me, why ask me to spend my life with you? Why have children with me?" Mark looked away, unable or unwilling to answer that specific question. He resorted to cruelty instead. "Look, Susan, let's be honest. It was comfortable, convenient. But passion? Connection? We never had that. I was never in love with you." He waved a dismissive hand in her direction. "And over the years, you let yourself go. You became old, heavy, always smelling of cooking oil." Each word was a deliberately poisoned dart. Susan felt the blood drain from her face. He was using her sacrifices, the very evidence of her devotion to him and their family, as weapons against her. The meals she cooked, the children she nurtured, the long hours at the eatery to supplement his income, all twisted into reasons for his rejection. "You ungrateful bastard!" Megan exploded, unable to contain herself any longer. "She worked her fingers to the bone for you, supported you through school, bore your children, and this is how you repay her." "This isn't about gratitude, Megan," Mark snapped, his face hard. "This is about happiness. My happiness. And I wasn't happy with Susan, haven't been for years. The only reason I didn't leave sooner was because of the kids." He turned back to Susan, his voice cold and final. "Let's just end this cleanly. I'll be generous financially. Just sign the papers." The mention of money, as if it could compensate for a decade of her life, for the utter devastation he had wrought, ignited a fresh wave of fury in Susan. "Generous?" She laughed, a dry, broken sound. "You think money fixes this? You think you can throw cash at the wreckage you've made and walk away clean?" Her hands clenched. The urge to slap him again, harder this time, was almost unbearable. Instead, she lifted her chin, finding a shard of steel amidst the ruin. No, Mark. I'm not signing anything. Not yet. You want a divorce? You're going to have to fight for it. The days following the disastrous family meeting passed in an agonizingly tense week. Mark remained in the house, a cold, unwelcome presence. He moved with an air of impatient entitlement, expecting meals to appear, clothes to be laundered, all while making no attempt to hide his constant communication with Nina. The air vibrated with unspoken accusations and simmering resentment. Susan felt like a ghost in her own home. Mark's words echoed relentlessly in her mind. Never loved you. Let yourself go. Heavy. Smelling of cooking oil. Only stayed for the children. They eroded the remnants of her self-esteem, leaving her raw and vulnerable. She found herself avoiding mirrors, acutely aware of the tired lines around her eyes, the slight thickening of her waist that hadn't been there before Ben, the faint smell of spices that clung to her clothes even after showering. Had she truly become so unattractive? Had her devotion made her frumpy and blind? One evening, driven by a desperate need for answers, she confronted him again as he was preparing to go out, whistling the same tune as the day she'd seen him with Nina. "Why, Mark?" she asked, her voice small but firm. "Why stay for 10 years if you were so unhappy? If you never loved me?" He paused, adjusting his expensive watch, his reflection cool and distant in the hallway mirror. "I told you. It was stable. You were a good mother, a decent homemaker. It worked. For a while." He finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "People change, Susan. Needs change. I needed something more. Someone who understands my world, who fits. Someone like Nina?" The name was acid on her tongue. "Yes," he said simply without apology. "She gets me. We connect on a different level." He looked her up and down, a critical, appraising gaze that made her skin crawl. "You have to admit, Susan, you haven't exactly kept yourself up. You're always tired, always stressed about the eatery or the kids. There's no spark left." The injustice of it choked her. He was the one who had demanded a stable home, well-cared-for children, the supplementary income from her eatery so he could climb the corporate ladder. Now he blamed her for the very toll those demands had taken. "That spark died because you starved it, Mark," she retorted, anger giving her strength. "You took everything I offered, my youth, my energy, my support, and gave nothing but indifference in return. Now you blame me for the emptiness you created?" He scoffed, turning away. "Think what you want. It doesn't change anything. I'm leaving. And I want a divorce." He paused at the door. "And don't think you get to keep everything. The house, the assets, half of it's mine. We'll split it. And custody. We'll work something out." The casual way he spoke of dividing their lives, their children, sent a new, cold wave of fear through her. This wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. This was about survival. This was about protecting her children. The breaking point came during a weekend visit from Mark's mother. She arrived ostensibly to see her grandchildren, but her real purpose was clear: to assess the situation, perhaps to mediate. What she witnessed, however, cemented her loyalties irrevocably. It started when Ben got sick. He had a high fever and a hacking cough that kept him and Susan up most of the night. Susan had stayed with him, sponging his forehead, administering medicine, her own exhaustion forgotten. Mark, awakened by the coughing, had merely grumbled, rolled over, and gone back to sleep. The next morning, when his mother arrived, Ben was listless on the sofa, and Susan looked pale and sleep-deprived. Mark emerged late, freshly showered, ready for a golf game he clearly had no intention of canceling. He barely glanced at his sick son. "Morning, Mom. Susan, is breakfast ready?" I'm meeting the guys at 10. His mother stared at him, her eyes narrowed. Your son is sick, Mark, and your wife has been up all night. Mark waved a dismissive hand. It's just a cold. Susan can handle it. She always does. He started rummaging in the fridge. Where's the good coffee? Before Susan could react, his mother shot to her feet, her small frame rigid with fury. Susan handles everything, doesn't she, Mark? While you swan around playing the successful executive, do you even remember where you came from? Mark froze, startled by her tone. Mom, what's gotten into you? What's gotten into me? His mother's voice rose, trembling with long-suppressed rage. Let me tell you, I remember when you were a scrawny student with holes in your shoes. I remember who worked 2 jobs, selling sticky rice in the morning and sewing piece rate at night to pay your tuition after your father fell ill. Who scrimped and saved so you could eat properly? It wasn't Nina, was it? It was Susan! She pointed a trembling finger at Susan, who stood in stunned silence. This woman! She came into our lives when we had nothing. She loved you when you were nobody. She poured her heart and soul into you, into this family, into raising children you barely acknowledge. She made this house a home, built a business with her own 2 hands to help support your ambitions. And now that you have a fancy title and a little money, you discard her like trash for that opportunist who already dumped you once. Tears streamed down his mother's face, tears of fury and disappointment. You say she let herself go? Who wouldn't be tired after carrying this family for 10 years while you chased success? You complain she smells of cooking oil. That's the smell of her sacrifice, you ungrateful child. The smell of the food that has fed you, fed your children. She turned on Mark, her eyes blazing. You disgust me. You are no son of mine if you treat the woman who gave you everything like this. You want a divorce? Fine. But don't you dare think I'll side with you. From this moment on, Susan is my daughter. As for you, get out. And don't take anything but the clothes on your back. Mark stood in stunned silence, his face ashen. His mother's words, delivered with such raw power and conviction in front of Susan, were a public stripping away of his justifications, a condemnation more profound than any legal judgment. He opened his mouth, then closed it, speechless. He grabbed his car keys and stormed out of the house, the slamming door echoing the finality of his mother's pronouncement. Susan finally let out a shaky breath, tears blurring her vision. Not just tears of pain, but of a profound, unexpected gratitude for the fierce, unwavering support of the woman who had been her mother-in-law for a decade. In the midst of the wreckage, Mark's mother had just handed her a shield. The silence in the house after Mark finally packed his bags and left was both a relief and a burden. The constant tension was gone, but his absence left a void, a stark reminder of the life that had imploded. Susan moved through the familiar rooms, catching glimpses of herself in reflective surfaces. The window pane, the microwave door, the large hallway mirror. What she saw confirmed Mark's cruel words, but also sparked a flicker of defiance. Yes, she was heavier than when they'd first married. Her skin, once smooth, now bore the marks of fatigue and sun exposure from working outdoors at her stall. Her clothes were practical, comfortable, chosen for function over fashion. She looked like a mother, a provider, a woman who had poured all her energy outwards, neglecting her own vessel. But looking closer, she also saw strength in her eyes, a resilience forged in hardship. She saw capability in her hands, hands that could cook, clean, soothe a feverish child, and manage a business. Mark had tried to define her by her perceived flaws, by her deviation from the glamorous image of a wife he craved. He had failed to see the substance beneath the surface. One afternoon, needing new clothes for the changing season, Susan ventured to a nearby department store. Browsing racks of brightly colored dresses, she felt a fleeting longing for something pretty, something just for herself. She picked out a style she liked, a simple A-line dress, and took it to the fitting room. It wouldn't zip. Flustered, she asked a young sales assistant for a larger size. The assistant, barely out of her teens, gave Susan a quick, dismissive once-over. "Sorry, ma'am," she said, not unkindly, but with brutal directness. "We don't carry that style in sizes that large." Humiliation burned Susan's cheeks. It wasn't just Mark's perception, it was society's reflection. She wasn't just not keeping up with her husband. She was literally outside the normal size range in a mainstream store. She fled the shop, the salesgirl's casual words ringing louder than Mark's calculated insults. Back home, staring at her reflection again, the defiance hardened into resolve. Mark's betrayal was the catalyst, but this change wouldn't be for him. It wouldn't be to win him back or to fit into a dress size deemed acceptable by a salesgirl. This would be for her, for the woman who had sacrificed and endured, who deserved to feel strong, healthy, and confident in her own skin, regardless of any man. It was time to reclaim herself. Megan, ever supportive, immediately suggested solutions. Yoga? Zumba? Or the gym? There's a new place that opened near the mall. Looks pretty professional. The thought of a gym, full of toned fitness enthusiasts in tight clothing, was terrifying. But the memory of the department store and the deeper need for change propelled Susan forward. "Okay," she agreed, surprising herself. "Let's check out that gym." The place Megan mentioned was called Body and Soul Fitness. It was bright, modern, and thrumming with energy. Upbeat music, the clank of weights, and people of all shapes and sizes moving purposefully on various machines. It felt like another world. Susan clutched her bag nervously, feeling frumpy and out of place in her loose pants and oversized top. While Megan inquired at the front desk, Susan's attention was drawn to a man instructing a client on a rowing machine. He was tall, well-built, not overly muscled, but with an air of lean strength. He moved with quiet confidence, his instructions clear and encouraging. He wasn't classically handsome like Mark, but there was a calm, capable aura about him. He glanced up briefly, his eyes meeting Susan's. He gave a slight, polite nod before turning back to his client. "That's Paul," Megan whispered, following her gaze. "My cousin, actually. Well, his mom and my mom are super close. He owns the place, widower, really good guy, very dedicated." Susan looked away quickly, flustered. Megan signed her up for a trial membership and a basic orientation session. The thought of working out under the potential scrutiny of her best friend's cousin, the gym owner, added to her anxiety, but she was determined. Her first few sessions were brutal. Every muscle ached. She felt clumsy, breathless, acutely aware of her shortcomings. But she persisted. She focused on the burn, on the sweat trickling down her face, channeling her frustration and pain into physical exertion. She started with short stints on the treadmill, light weights, under the guidance of a patient female trainer Megan recommended. She avoided peak hours, preferring the quieter mid-morning slots after her kids were at school and before her own lunch rush at the eatery. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. She could walk longer on the treadmill, lift slightly heavier weights. The persistent ache in her lower back began to ease. More importantly, the fog of despair started to lift, replaced by a sense of accomplishment after each session. She was doing something for herself, taking control of one aspect of her life when so much else felt chaotic. Paul, the gym owner, maintained a professional distance, but Susan was often aware of his quiet presence. He moved around the gym floor, offering tips, adjusting equipment, ensuring everything ran smoothly. He never singled her out, but occasionally their paths would cross. A brief good morning, an encouraging nod when she was struggling with a particular exercise, a quick glance to see if she needed help adjusting a machine. His demeanor was a stark contrast to Mark's slick charm. Paul was understated, observant, his kindness expressed in small, practical gestures. One morning, seeing her wince while stretching, he approached quietly. "You want to be careful with that hamstring," he said, his voice calm. "Try modifying the stretch like this." He demonstrated a gentler version. "Don't push through sharp pain. Listen to your body." He offered a brief, encouraging smile and moved on. Another time, as she was leaving, juggling her gym bag, water bottle, and keys, she dropped her keys, sending them skittering across the floor. Before she could react, Paul was there, scooping them up for her. "Happens to the best of us," he said easily, handing them back. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting contact that sent an unexpected jolt through Susan. She mumbled her thanks, her cheeks warm. She learned snippets about him through Megan. He had lost his wife to cancer a few years prior. He rarely spoke of it, pouring his energy into the gym and maintaining a quiet, disciplined life. He wasn't actively looking for a relationship, Megan said, still healing in his own way. Knowing this added a layer of respect to Susan's perception of him. He understood loss, albeit a different kind. The gym became more than just a place to exercise. It was a sanctuary, a space where she was rebuilding herself, physically and mentally. And Paul, initially just Megan's cousin and the gym owner, was becoming a quiet, steady presence on the periphery of her transformation. The final day in court felt surreal. Susan sat beside her lawyer, outwardly composed, but her palms were damp, her stomach churning. Across the aisle, Mark radiated barely suppressed fury, occasionally shooting venomous glances her way. Nina was absent. A strategic decision, Susan suspected, to avoid further antagonizing the judge. The hearing was tense but relatively brief. Susan's lawyer methodically presented the evidence. Proof of Mark's infidelity, documentation of Susan's income from the eatery, and her significant savings account, the existence of which clearly stunned Mark. Testimony from Megan, and a statement from Mark's mother reiterating her support for Susan and detailing Mark's neglect and verbal abuse. Crucially, the court-appointed social worker reported that both Lily and Ben had unequivocally expressed their desire to live with their mother. The judge's ruling was clear: divorce granted. Marital assets, including the house, were to be divided equally after valuation, though Susan's lawyer had successfully argued that her premarital savings used initially should be factored in. Full custody of both Lily and Ben was awarded to Susan. Mark was granted visitation rights, but ordered to pay substantial monthly child support until both children turned 18. A wave of dizziness washed over Susan as the judge concluded. It was over. She had won. She had protected her children and secured their future. Yet, the victory felt strangely hollow. As Mark stormed out of the courtroom, muttering about an appeal, Susan felt an unexpected pang, not of regret for him, but a deep sadness for the lost years, the shattered dream, the what-ifs, that would forever remain unanswered. Back home, the quiet house felt unusually large, echoing the finality of the court's decision. She had fought so hard for this outcome, but now that it was here, a strange emptiness enveloped her. She sank onto the sofa, the legal documents spread on the coffee table, and for the first time since the initial shock, she allowed herself to cry. Not for the man Mark had become, but for the marriage she thought she'd had. For the decade of her life she had invested in a lie. For the naive young woman who had once believed in fairy tales. Life began to settle into a new rhythm: school runs, managing the eatery, gym sessions, helping with homework, bedtime stories. The schedule was demanding but steady. Susan focused on her children, her business, and her own well-being. Her eatery, benefiting from some modern updates suggested by Megan and subtle marketing tips from Paul, who always insisted on paying for his occasional lunches there, was thriving. One sweltering afternoon, as Susan was prepping ingredients for the evening rush, the bell above the eatery door jangled aggressively. She looked up, her heart sinking. Mark stood there, looking thinner, his usual arrogant swagger replaced by a frayed, frustrated air. Beside him, clinging possessively to his arm, was Nina, visibly pregnant, her belly swelling beneath a fashionable maternity dress. "We need to talk," Mark announced, bypassing any pleasantries. Nina surveyed the busy eatery. Then Susan, her eyes lingering on Susan's noticeably trimmer figure and clearer skin, a result of better self-care. A flicker of something. Surprise? Annoyance? Crossed her face before it settled back into its usual smugness. "Well, well, Susan, you're certainly spending Mark's alimony lavishly on yourself, aren't you? New clothes, gym membership." Susan drew herself up, wiping her hands on her apron, refusing to be intimidated. "This is my business, Nina, and how I spend my money, earned through my hard work, is my concern. What do you want, Mark?" "The house," Mark said bluntly. "The valuation is in. I want my half. Now Nina and I need a place for the baby." "The court ordered a division of assets, Mark, not an immediate liquidation that forces me and your children onto the street," Susan replied calmly, though her blood ran cold. "My lawyer is handling the settlement process. You'll get your share when it's legally finalized, likely through a refinance or structured payout." "I need it now," Mark insisted, his voice rising. Customers glanced over, curious. Nina stepped forward, hand on her belly, adopting a saccharine tone. "Susan, be reasonable. Think of the baby. Your niece or nephew. Surely you don't want us to struggle." She then half turned towards the kitchen, where Mark's mother often helped during peak hours. "Auntie, are you here? Perhaps you can talk some sense into her. After all, you'll want to dote on your new grandbaby." Before Susan could retort, Mark's mother emerged, wiping her hands, her expression thunderous. "New grandbaby?" She looked Nina up and down with open disdain. "My only grandchildren are Lily and Ben. As for you," she fixed Nina with a glare, "don't you dare call me auntie, and don't think for 1 second I'll lift a finger for you or the child conceived in betrayal. This house belongs to Susan and my true grandchildren." She pointed towards the door. "Now get out, both of you, before I call the police for harassment." Mark looked shocked at his mother's vehemence. Nina's face contorted with rage, the mask completely slipping. "You'll regret this, you old hag," she hissed. "Get out." Mark's mother repeated, her voice low and dangerous. Defeated and humiliated, Mark grabbed Nina's arm and pulled her out of the eatery, the bell jangling mockingly behind them. Susan let out a shaky breath, exchanging a look of grim solidarity with her former mother-in-law. The battle might be over legally, but the war, it seemed, was far from won. Susan decided to reinvest a portion of her savings and the eatery's profits into a significant upgrade. With Megan as an enthusiastic partner, they planned a relaunch. A refreshed menu incorporating healthier options alongside the classics, brighter decor, and a stronger online presence. Paul, who initially offered advice as a friend, became an invaluable resource. His understanding of branding and social media, honed from promoting his gym, was surprisingly applicable. He helped design simple, attractive flyers, took eye-catching food photos for an online menu, and even showed Susan how to manage a basic Facebook page for the eatery. Their collaboration meant more time spent together, often meeting after hours at the eatery or the gym to brainstorm. Susan found herself looking forward to these sessions. Paul's calm competence was reassuring, his quiet sense of humor infectious. He listened patiently to her ideas, offered constructive feedback, and never once made her feel inadequate. He spoke easily of his own daughter, sharing anecdotes that revealed a loving, devoted father. A comfortable camaraderie had developed between them, verging on a deeper connection Susan was still too wary to fully acknowledge. The grand reopening of Susan's kitchen was a resounding success. Friends, loyal customers, and curious newcomers packed the small space. Megan beamed, Mark's mother presided proudly over the cash register, and even Lily and Ben helped by handing out menus, feeling important. Paul arrived with a beautiful orchid, his quiet congratulations meaning more to Susan than all the other well wishes combined. The festive atmosphere shattered when Mark appeared, stumbling through the crowd. He looked disheveled, smelled faintly of alcohol, and his eyes held a desperate, resentful glint. "Well, well, well," he announced loudly, ensuring maximum attention. "Quite the celebration. Spending my money well, are we, Susan? Looking quite pleased with yourself." He gestured vaguely around the revamped space. "Fancy." Susan stiffened, her hand tightening on a serving ladle. "Mark, this isn't the time or place. Please leave." "Leave?" He laughed bitterly. "Why should I leave?" "Came to congratulate my dear ex-wife on her success. Built on my misery, no doubt." He leaned towards a table of customers as if confiding a secret. "She took everything, you know, kicked me out of my house, turned my own mother against me, all while playing the victim." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Megan stepped forward, furious. "Mark, get out now, or I'm calling security." "Security?" Mark scoffed. "I just want what's mine. She's hiding assets. The gold my mother gave her, that's family gold. It belongs to me now." He lunged towards the counter where Mark's mother stood, his eyes fixed on the cash box. Before anyone could react, Paul moved. He intercepted Mark with surprising speed, his hand clamping onto Mark's arm. He wasn't aggressive, but his presence was suddenly commanding. "That's enough, Mark," Paul said, his voice low but authoritative. "You're drunk, and you're making a scene. It's time for you to go." Mark struggled, trying to wrench his arm free, but Paul's grip was like steel. "Who the hell are you?" Mark snarled, finally focusing on the man restraining him. "I'm a friend," Paul replied evenly, "and I'm asking you to leave Miss Susan's establishment peacefully." He applied a subtle pressure, unbalancing Mark. The action wasn't violent, but it was clear Paul was in control and wouldn't hesitate to escalate if necessary. Humiliated and momentarily intimidated, Mark shot Paul a look of pure hatred, then glanced at Susan. "This isn't over," he spat, before stumbling out the door. Silence descended, broken only by Mark's mother's shaky sigh. Susan looked at Paul, her heart hammering, a wave of gratitude washing over her. He had stepped in, protected her, calmly diffused a potentially explosive situation without creating a bigger scene. He met her eyes, his expression concerned. "Are you okay?" She could only nod, speechless, suddenly intensely aware of his hand still resting lightly on her arm, a point of warmth and strength in the chaotic aftermath. The connection she had hesitated to acknowledge had just flared, undeniably, between them. The incident at the relaunch acted as a catalyst. The shared crisis, Paul's quiet protection of her, shifted the dynamic between them. The comfortable friendship now held an undercurrent of unspoken attraction. Paul became a more regular presence, not just as a business advisor, but as a concerned friend, sharing meals, and occasionally joining Susan and the kids for simple park outings. Lily and Ben adored him. He listened to their endless stories with genuine interest and patience, a stark contrast to Mark's frequent impatience and distraction. One quiet evening, after the children were asleep and they were having tea at Susan's kitchen table, discussing plans for a weekend market stall, Paul paused, looking at her intently. "Susan," he began, his usual calm tinged with nervousness. I I need to be honest about something. My feelings for you. They've grown beyond friendship. I admire your strength, your resilience, your devotion to your children. You're an incredible woman. I know the timing might be soon, and your wounds are still healing, but I care about you, deeply, and I'd like the chance to be more than friends, if you'd be open to it." Susan's breath caught. She had suspected, perhaps hoped, but hearing the words spoken aloud sent an unreadable mixture of warmth and fear through her. Mark's betrayal had left deep scars, a profound distrust of relationships, of men's promises. Could she risk opening herself up again? Could she trust this quiet, kind man not to eventually disappoint her? Paul, I. She struggled for words. "I value your friendship more than I can say. You've been a rock, and I care about you too. But," she looked down at her hands, "I'm scared. Mark, he took so much. My trust is shattered, and I have Lily and Ben to think about. I can't risk hurting them again." Paul reached across the table, gently covering her hand with his. His touch was warm, steady, undemanding. "I understand, Susan, completely, and I would never push you or pressure you. Your healing, your children's happiness comes first. All I ask is that you don't close the door completely. Let me be here as a friend, and perhaps, one day, you'll feel ready to trust again. I'm willing to wait." His understanding, his patience, was deeply moving. It was the antithesis of Mark's selfish demands. Tears welled in her eyes, not tears of sadness, but of a fragile hope. She didn't pull her hand away. Life continued, with Paul remaining a steady, supportive presence, respecting the boundaries Susan had set. Then came the day that changed everything. Lily, usually careful, had a bicycle accident in the park, falling awkwardly and gashing her leg badly on a sharp rock. Susan received a frantic call from a neighbor and rushed to the scene, finding her daughter pale, bleeding, and terrified. At the local clinic, the doctor was concerned. The cut was deep, near a major artery, and Lily had lost a significant amount of blood. Worse, she had a relatively rare blood type, and the clinic's supply was low. They needed a donor, quickly. Susan felt panic rise. Her blood type didn't match. Megan was out of town. Mark's mother was too frail. She fumbled for her phone, her mind racing, wondering who to call. As if sensing her distress, her phone buzzed. It was Paul, calling to confirm their plans for the market stall. "Paul!" Susan blurted out, explaining the situation in a rush, her voice choked with fear. Without a second's hesitation, Paul said, "What's her blood type?" "Clinic address? I'm on my way." It turned out Paul shared Lily's rare blood type. He arrived within 20 minutes, calm and reassuring despite the urgency. He underwent the quick screening and donated blood without a fuss, then sat quietly by Lily's bedside, holding her small hand while Susan filled out paperwork, his presence a solid anchor in her storm of anxiety. Later, after Lily was stable, stitched up, and resting comfortably, still a little woozy from mild pain medication, Susan found Paul waiting outside the room. She walked towards him, overwhelmed with emotion. "Paul, thank you," she whispered, her voice thick. You saved her." He just shook his head, his expression gentle. "Anyone would have done the same, Susan. I'm just glad I could help." He looked at her, his eyes full of unspoken tenderness. "She's a wonderful kid, just like her mom." In that moment, looking into his steady, compassionate eyes, Susan's carefully constructed walls crumbled. This man hadn't just offered words of support, he had acted, decisively and selflessly, when her child needed him most. His kindness wasn't a performance, it was intrinsic. The fear that had held her captive loosened its grip, replaced by a profound gratitude and a burgeoning certainty. She reached out, laying her hand on his arm. "No," she said softly, meeting his gaze. "Not everyone. Thank you." It wasn't a declaration of love. Not yet. But it was an opening, an acceptance, a quiet acknowledgement that she was finally ready to consider letting him in. Paul understood. He placed his hand over hers, a silent promise exchanged between them. News of Lily's accident eventually reached Mark, probably through his mother. He called Susan, not immediately, but a day later. His tone wasn't concerned, but accusatory. "I heard Lily had an accident," he began. "Why wasn't I informed immediately? I'm her father." "She's fine, Mark," Susan said wearily. "And you were unreachable. As usual." "Unreachable? I have responsibilities. Nina hasn't been well," he retorted defensively. Word from acquaintances suggested Nina's pregnancy was difficult, and their finances, hampered by Mark's reduced income post-divorce and Nina's expensive tastes, were strained. Besides, he added, a sneer creeping into his voice, "I hear your new friend was there to play hero." "Paul was there because he cares, Mark," Susan said, refusing to be drawn into an argument. "He helped." End of story. There was a pause. Then Mark's voice softened slightly, taking on a pleading tone Susan hadn't heard in years. "Susan, maybe we made a mistake. This thing with Nina, it's not what I expected. She's demanding. Difficult." "That's no longer my concern, Mark." Susan cut him off, her voice firm. "We're divorced. My only concern is raising my children in peace." "But the kids," he persisted. "Don't you think they need their father?" Maybe I could come back? We could try again?" Susan almost laughed. The audacity, the sheer self-absorption, was astounding. After everything he had put her through, the humiliation, the cruelty, the neglect, he thought he could just waltz back in when his new life became inconvenient. "No, Mark," she said, the steel returning to her voice. "There is no try again. That door is closed, bolted, locked. You made your choice. Live with it. You can see the children on your visitation schedule as long as you're sober and respectful. That's it." She hung up before he could reply, her hand trembling slightly, not with fear, but with the finality of her own conviction. The ghost of their past held no more power over her. A year later, Megan was getting married. The wedding reception buzzed with happy energy, music, and laughter. Susan watched her friend, radiant in her wedding dowdy, and felt a genuine, uncomplicated joy for her. She looked around the room, her gaze falling on Lily and Ben, now 9 and 6, laughing as they chased other children around the dance floor. Mark's mother sat at a nearby table, chatting animatedly with relatives, looking happier and more relaxed than Susan had seen her in years. And beside her, his hand resting lightly on her waist, was Paul. Their relationship had deepened over the past year, built on mutual respect, shared values, and a quiet affection. He was patient, kind, a true partner in navigating the complexities of life and co-parenting. He loved her children as if they were his own, and they, in turn, had wholeheartedly accepted him. As the evening wound down and a slow song began to play, Paul led Susan onto the dance floor. They moved together easily, comfortably, her hand warm and secure in his. "Happy?" he murmured, smiling down at her. Susan leaned her head against his shoulder, inhaling his familiar, comforting scent. "Very," she whispered. More than happy, content, at peace, whole. He stopped dancing, gently turning her to face him. His eyes were serious, full of love. "Susan," he said softly, his voice just audible above the music. "We've taken things slow, let things heal. But I know, with everything I am, that I want to spend the rest of my life with you, with Lily, with Ben. I want to build a future together." He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Inside, nestled on a dark lining, was a simple, elegant ring, a single clear sapphire flanked by tiny diamonds. "Susan," he repeated, his voice husky with emotion. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Susan's eyes, blurring the sparkling stone. These were tears of joy, of release, of overwhelming gratitude for this second chance, this unexpected gift of love after a Z. Oh, much pain. She looked from the ring to his earnest, loving face and saw her future reflected in his eyes, a future filled with warmth, respect, and partnership. "Yes," she breathed, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, Paul." "I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger. A perfect fit. He drew her close, holding her tightly as the music swelled around them. It wasn't a fairy tale ending born of youthful innocence, but something far more precious. A hard-won happiness, a testament to resilience, forgiveness, mostly of herself, and the enduring power of love to bloom even in the rockiest soil. Sunlight streamed into the bright, open-plan kitchen of their new home, spacious enough for their blended family, built on shared dreams and hard work. Susan, now 44, moved with easy confidence, overseeing breakfast preparations. Her eatery had expanded, now a beloved local restaurant she co-managed with Megan, allowing Susan more flexibility. The lines on her face were still there, but now they were laugh lines, crinkling around eyes that shone with contentment. Lily, a young teenager, expertly flipped pancakes, chatting with Paul about a school project. Ben and Susie, Paul's daughter, now firm siblings, set the table, bickering good-naturedly over who got the good juice glass. Paul walked in, wrapping his arms around Susan from behind, nuzzling her neck. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured. She leaned back against him, enjoying the familiar warmth. "Good morning." Occasionally, Mark would appear for his scheduled visitations. He looked older, worn. His relationship with Nina had eventually imploded after their baby, a son, was born, amidst financial struggles and mutual recriminations. He was paying child support, working a mid-level sales job with few prospects, living a solitary life tinged with regret. He was polite now, reserved, his arrogance long gone, replaced by a wistful sadness whenever he saw the happy, bustling life Susan had built without him, the life he had thrown away. Susan treated him with civility for the children's sake, but her heart held no bitterness, only a distant, detached pity. Mark's mother, still fiercely protective of Susan and her grandchildren, was a frequent visitor, basking in the lively atmosphere of their home. As they all gathered around the breakfast table, laughter filling the air, Susan caught Paul's eye. He smiled, a deep, loving smile that reached his eyes, a smile that held the promise of shared tomorrows. Her past was a scar, a reminder of pain endured and lessons learned, but it no longer defined her. Her present was full, her future bright. The echoes of betrayal had faded, replaced by the steady, harmonious symphony of a life reborn. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Paul reached across and took her hand. Susan squeezed back, her heart full. The renewal was complete, its melody playing softly, steadily in the daily rhythm of their lives. The peaceful rhythm of the morning continued. The warm, golden sunlight didn't just illuminate the kitchen, but seemed to dance on the gleaming stainless steel appliances and granite countertops, surfaces Susan sometimes still couldn't believe were hers, theirs. The smell of sizzling bacon now mingled with the sweet aroma of Lily's pancakes. Lily, at 14, was in that exciting, sometimes exasperating transition between childhood and young adulthood. One minute, she was expertly flipping batter. The next, dramatically rolling her eyes at something Ben said. She wore her school uniform, but a stylish, and Paul approved, silver bracelet dangled from her wrist. Paul, seriously, Mr. Harrison's explanation of quadratic equations makes no sense, Lily declared, sliding a perfectly golden pancake onto a waiting plate. Your way yesterday was so much clearer. Paul, leaning against the counter sipping coffee, chuckled. Glad I could help. But remember, understanding Mr. Harrison's way is important for the test. He winked. Even if my way is better. Susan smiled, stirring a pot of congee simmering on the stove, a familiar weekend breakfast treat. The easy rapport between Paul and Lily was a constant, quiet joy. He never tried to replace Mark, never forced a dad role, but simply was there, steady, supportive, interested. He helped with homework, attended school events, listened to teenage woes without judgment, and offered advice grounded in quiet wisdom. Lily, initially wary after the divorce, had slowly, wholeheartedly embraced him. Ben, now 11, and Susie, Paul's thoughtful 13-year-old daughter, were indeed engaged in a minor squabble over juice glasses. Mom said I get the blue one today, Ben insisted, trying to snatch one from Susie's grasp. No, Dad said I get it because I finished my chores first yesterday, Susie retorted, holding firm, though a smile played on her lips. Hey, Paul intervened gently, stepping over. How about this? Ben gets blue today, Susie gets green. Tomorrow, you switch. Fair? Both children considered this Solomon-like judgment and nodded, crisis averted. Susie shot Paul a grateful look. She adored her father and had welcomed Susan with surprising openness, perhaps sensing in her a shared experience of loss and rebuilding. Susan, in turn, was fond of Susie, always careful to respect the memory of Susie's mother while building her own warm relationship with the girl. Paul came up behind Susan again, looping his arms around her waist as she tasted the congee. Smells amazing, he murmured into her hair. His touch was familiar, grounding. 5 years into their marriage, the simple intimacy still sent a pleasant warmth through her. There was an ease between them, a deep understanding forged not just by love, but by mutual respect and shared experience. Both had known profound loss and the hard work of rebuilding. Needs a little more pepper, Susan decided, reaching for the grinder. Everything needs more pepper, according to you, Paul teased, stealing a piece of bacon from a nearby plate. Hey! Susan swatted his hand playfully. Just then, Mark's mother bustled in from the small back garden, carrying a basket of fresh herbs, her face beaming. Look at this! The mint is going crazy this morning. In her 70s, she was still remarkably energetic, her presence a fixed, loving part of their lives. She doted on Paul, often telling Susan he was the son she should have had. Her relationship with Mark remained civil but distant, focused solely on her grandchildren during his infrequent visits. As they all settled around the large wooden table, a table Paul had built himself, passing plates, pouring juice, chatting about the day ahead. A soccer game for Ben, a study group for Lily and Susie, Susan heading to the restaurant later, Paul to the gym. Susan paused. She looked at the faces around her, her resilient children growing and secure. Susie, bright and integrated. Paul, her partner, her love. His eyes meeting hers across the table with that familiar, steady affection. Mark's mother, content and cherished. The memory of Mark's last visit flickered. His awkwardness, the tangible regret that clung to him like a shroud, the way he seemed almost a stranger to his own children now. The feeling she had wasn't bitterness, nor was it triumph. It was a quiet acknowledgement of paths diverged. He had chosen his, driven by ego, insecurity, and the illusory chase for something more. He had ended up with less. She, forced onto a path she never sought, had stumbled through darkness but found her way to this sunlit kitchen, to this imperfect but deeply loving family. The congee was savory, the pancakes fluffy, the bacon crisp. Sunlight flooded the room. The ordinary sounds of a family breakfast created a symphony richer, more resonant than any idealized romantic dream of youth. This reality, built on resilience, forgiveness, and the courage to love again, was more than enough. It was everything. Paul reached across and squeezed her hand. Susan squeezed back, her heart full. The renewal was complete, its melody playing softly, steadily, in the daily rhythm of their lives. The peaceful rhythm of the morning continued. Paul rinsed his coffee mug while Susan packed lunches, simple bento boxes with rice, stir-fried vegetables, and grilled chicken. Lily, finished with her pancake duties, gathered her school books, her brow furrowed in concentration as she mentally reviewed the quadratic formula. Ben and Susie, their juice glass truce holding, worked with surprising efficiency to clear the remaining breakfast dishes from the table. Mark's mother sat in her favorite armchair by the window, expertly shelling peas into a large bowl, her movements economical and precise. Ben, Susan called over her shoulder, "Don't forget your library books. They're due today." "Got 'em, Mom!" he yelled back from the hallway where he was tying his shoelaces with unnecessary vigor. Paul dried his hands and came to inspect the lunchboxes. "Looks good. Think Lily needs an extra spring roll? She said she has chemistry lab right before lunch. Always makes her extra hungry." Susan paused, considering. Good point. She added another crispy spring roll to Lily's box. It was these small considerations, this unspoken teamwork in anticipating the children's needs, that form the strong, almost invisible threads of their daily life. It wasn't grand gestures, but the steady accumulation of quiet care, of shared responsibility that made their blended family function so smoothly. Mark, in the past, had rarely noticed such details, preoccupied with his own needs. Assuming Susan would handle everything, Paul participated not as a helper, but as an equal partner. Susie approached Susan hesitantly, holding out a drawing. It depicted their house, slightly lopsided, with stick figures representing the entire family standing outside, smiling under a bright yellow sun. "I made this in art class yesterday," she said softly, her eyes searching Susan's face for approval. Susan took the drawing gently, her heart warming. "Susie, this is beautiful. Look, you even drew Grandma's herbs by the door." She smiled warmly at the girl. "Thank you. Shall we put it on the fridge?" Susie beamed, relief and pleasure evident on her face. "Yes, please." Paul ruffled his daughter's hair affectionately. "Nice work, sweetie." These moments, Susan knew, mattered. Building trust with Susie had been a gradual process, requiring patience and sensitivity. Susan had never tried to replace the mother Susie had lost, but rather offered a different maternal presence, steady, kind, and consistent. Seeing Susie's growing confidence and sense of belonging in their home was one of Susan's quietest, deepest satisfactions. The phone rang, its cheerful electronic tune momentarily interrupting the domestic harmony. Paul glanced at the caller ID on the wall-mounted unit. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "It's Mark," he said quietly to Susan, his voice neutral. Susan nodded, taking a steadying breath. Interactions with Mark, though less frequent now, still carried a faint residue of past pain and awkwardness. "Put him on speaker if you want," she offered. They had learned that transparency was best. Paul picked up the receiver. "Hello, Mark." "Paul." Mark's voice came through, sounding a little strained. Is Ben there? I was just confirming with him about picking him up for the soccer game on Saturday." His visits were now irregular, often changed at the last minute based on his work schedule or, Susan suspected, his fluctuating finances and moods. Yes, he's right here, Paul replied evenly. Hold on. He gestured to Ben, who trotted over, taking the phone with a casual, Hi, Dad. Susan listened quietly as Ben confirmed the Saturday pickup time and place. His voice was polite but lacked the uninhibited enthusiasm he displayed when talking about plans with Paul or his friends. He answered Mark's questions concisely, offering little extra information. It wasn't hostility, Susan noted, but a certain reserve, a learned, emotional distance. Yeah, Dad. Okay. See you Saturday. Bye. Ben hung up, his expression unreadable for a moment before he shrugged and turned back to grab his backpack. Dad sounded a bit tired. He commented vaguely to no one in particular before yelling, Lily! Susie! Bus is almost here! And bolting for the door. Paul met Susan's eyes. There was no judgment in his gaze, just a shared understanding. They didn't need to analyze Ben's reaction or Mark's tone. They simply accepted it as part of the complex tapestry of their lives. Mark was Ben and Lily's father, a biological fact, a figure from their past who drifted in and out of their present. Paul was the man who tucked Ben in at night, who cheered loudest at his soccer games, who was always, reliably, there. The children navigated this reality with the resilience of youth. Right then, Paul said, shaking off the slight tension the call had introduced. Bus time. He followed the children out to make sure they got on safely, a daily ritual he rarely missed. Susan watched them go, then turned back to the kitchen, picking up Susie's drawing. She smoothed it gently, her fingers tracing the smiling stick figures under the lopsided house. Their life wasn't a fairy tale, scrubbed clean of past hurts or future challenges. It was real, messy, sometimes complicated, but grounded in love, effort, and a quiet determination to build something good and lasting together, one ordinary day at a time. She carefully placed the drawing on the refrigerator door, held fast by a chili pepper-shaped magnet, a small, bright symbol of their vibrant, resilient, perfectly imperfect family. Once the children were safely on the bus, and Paul was getting ready to head to the gym after a quick goodbye kiss, the house settled into a quieter rhythm. Mark's mother hummed softly as she continued shelling peas, the rhythmic snap of pods into the metal bowl, a gentle counterpoint to the ticking clock. Susan finished tidying the kitchen, gave the counters a final wipe, and gathered her own things for the day. I'm off to the restaurant, she said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. Megan should be there opening up. All right, dear, Mark's mother replied without looking up from her task. Don't work too hard. Remember what Paul said about taking a proper lunch break today. Susan smiled. Paul was always gently reminding her to pace herself, knowing her tendency to throw herself into work, a habit ingrained from the lean years. I remember, she assured her mother-in-law. We have a new part-timer starting today, so it should be better. The drive to Susan's kitchen was short, through familiar streets bustling with morning traffic. Pulling up outside, Susan felt a familiar swell of pride. The restaurant, now expanded into the adjacent storefront they'd acquired 2 years prior, looked inviting. The cheerful blue awning was clean, planter boxes bloomed on the windowsills, and the faint scent of garlic and lemongrass was already wafting onto the sidewalk. It was a far cry from the tiny, struggling roadside stall she'd run for so many years, often worrying if the day's takings would cover expenses. Inside, Megan was indeed already there, directing the prep team. 2 young commis chefs and the new part-time server, a shy college student named Maya. Megan, now happily married herself, but still Susan's indispensable business partner, greeted her with a wide grin. Morning, boss. Ready for the lunch rush? Megan teased. Always, Susan laughed, tying on a fresh apron. How's Maya settling in? Good, good. Megan lowered her voice slightly. A bit nervous, but seems eager to learn. I've got her polishing cutlery. Susan nodded, making a mental note to spend some time with the new girl later, to make her feel welcome. She remembered her own early days, the constant anxiety, and she tried to foster a supportive environment for her staff. Mark's mother arrived shortly after, her pea-shelling duties complete, ready to take up her familiar post near the cash register, greeting regular customers with a warmth that made them feel like family. Her presence wasn't strictly necessary from a business perspective anymore, but she enjoyed the social interaction, and Susan knew it gave her a sense of purpose. It was another thread in the interwoven fabric of their lives. The morning passed in a flurry of activity, chopping vegetables, simmering broths, coordinating orders, managing the flow of customers. Susan moved through it all with practiced efficiency, her movements economical, her instructions clear. She enjoyed the bustle, the satisfaction of creating good food that people appreciated. This work, once born purely of necessity, had become a source of creative fulfillment and independence. She remembered the exhaustion of the past, the constant pressure, the feeling of shouldering the family alone while Mark pursued his ambitions. Now, she worked hard. Yes, but it was different. It was her business, built on her skills, shared with her trusted friend, and supported by her loving family. The burden had been replaced by a sense of ownership and accomplishment. During a brief lull before the main rush, Megan brought over 2 steaming bowls of pho. "Eat," she ordered, sitting down opposite Susan at a small staff table in the back. "Before it gets crazy." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the familiar, fragrant broth warming them. "Saw Mark's car down the street yesterday," Megan remarked casually, slurping noodles. "Looked like he was waiting for someone. Seemed lost." Susan nodded slowly, squeezing more lime into her bowl. "He called this morning about picking up Ben on Saturday." She offered no further details. Megan didn't pry. They had an unspoken understanding. Mark was a part of their shared history, a ghost whose presence occasionally flickered at the edges of their current reality. But he held no power here, in this bright, bustling space, filled with the aroma of good food and the energy of Susan's hard-won success. "Well," Megan said, quickly changing the subject. "That food blogger I told you about?" She replied to the email. "She wants to come next week." Susan's eyes lit up. "Really? That's fantastic." They spent the next few minutes eagerly discussing menu options for the blogger's visit, the brief mention of Mark already fading, overshadowed by the forward momentum of Susan's thriving business and the promise of the future. The lunch rush began, sweeping them back into the demanding but satisfying rhythm of their work. The lunch rush hit like a predictable, yet always intense, wave. Orders flew in, steaming bowls of pho jostling on trays with fragrant plates of broken rice with grilled pork, vibrant vermicelli with grilled pork, and crispy, savory pancakes. The kitchen clanged with the rhythmic chop of knives, the sizzle of woks, and the coordinated calls of chefs assembling dishes. Susan was in her element, orchestrating the chaos with a calm authority. She expedited orders at the pass, garnished plates with fresh herbs, troubleshot a minor issue with the broth seasoning, and still managed a welcoming smile for customers waiting for takeout. She noticed Maya, the new part-timer, looking overwhelmed as she tried to manage 3 tables at once. Making a moment, Susan quietly approached the girl. "Deep breaths, Maya," she said kindly, her voice low amidst the surrounding din. "It's okay. Focus on 1 table at a time. Table 4 just needs more water, see? And table 6 is ready to order. Let me get table 5 for you this time." Susan smoothly took the order from table 5, deftly answering questions about ingredients, her manner efficient and reassuring. Maya watched, visibly relaxing as she saw how Susan handled it. When Susan was done, she gave Maya an encouraging nod. You're doing great. Just, SK if you need help. Maya offered a grateful smile. Thank you, Miss Susan. This mentorship role felt natural to Susan now. She wanted her restaurant to be more than just a place that served good food, but a place where people felt valued, customers and staff alike. She remembered the sting of disregard, the feeling of being taken for granted and unappreciated in her marriage, and she consciously chose to lead differently. Around 1:30 p.m., the phone in her apron pocket buzzed. She glanced quickly. A short text from Paul. Gym is slammed. Hope the new girl is working out. Miss you. See you tonight. 3. A small smile touched Susan's lips. Those few words, that simple heart emoji, sent a wave of warmth through her. It was their shorthand, a way of staying connected during busy days. She quickly typed back, all good, crazy busy. See you later. As the main rush began to subside around 2 p.m., the frantic pace slowed to a steady hum. Customers lingered over Vietnamese coffees, chatting quietly. The kitchen staff began prepping for the smaller evening crowd. Megan appeared beside Susan, wiping sweat from her brow. Whew, that was a big one. Word about the food blogger potentially visiting is definitely creating a buzz. Let's hope we live up to the hype, Susan replied, her mind already reviewing recipes. We will, Megan said confidently. Now, Mark's mom has gone home for her afternoon rest, and I can hold the fort here for an hour. Your turn. She gave Susan a pointed look. Go take that break Paul insisted on. Sit down. Put your feet up. Read a book. Something. Susan hesitated. Old habits died hard. There was always something that needed doing. But looking at Megan's determined face and remembering Paul's gentle insistence, she relented. All right. Just for an hour. She retreated to the small, cluttered office space at the very back of the restaurant. It wasn't fancy. Just a desk, a chair, and shelves laden with invoices and recipe books. But it was quiet. She didn't read, but she did sit, leaning back in the chair and closing her eyes for a few moments, letting the sounds of the restaurant fade to a background murmur. She thought about the morning, the comfortable chaos of breakfast, Susie's drawing proudly displayed on the fridge, the easy teamwork with Paul, Ben's casual acceptance of his father's call. She thought about the satisfying bustle of the lunch rush, Maya's relieved smile, the brief, warm connection of Paul's text. There were no dramatic crescendos, no soaring operatic scores playing in the background of her life. Instead, there was this, a steady, underlying sense of peace woven from countless small moments of connection, accomplishment, and love. It was a hard-won peace, fiercely protected, and deeply cherished. After the turbulent years, the emotional roller coaster of betrayal and divorce, this quiet stability felt like the greatest luxury. After about 45 minutes of quiet reflection and tackling a few supplier emails, Susan felt refreshed. The bone-deep exhaustion that used to plague her constantly was gone, replaced by the satisfying tiredness that came from productive work. She stood, stretched, and headed back out, ready for the afternoon. Megan looked at her inquiringly. Feeling better? Much better, Susan admitted with a genuine smile. Thanks, Megan. She spent the rest of the afternoon finalizing orders for the next day, tasting a new dessert recipe the pastry chef was experimenting with, and spending a little more time coaching Maya on efficient order taking and handling customer payments. The rhythm was calmer now, the energy different from the midday frenzy, but still purposeful. As evening approached, the lights were dimmed slightly, casting a warmer glow over the dining area. The aroma shifted subtly as dinner specials began to simmer. Susan felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Another day was drawing to a close, another set of challenges met, another small step forward in the life she had carefully, lovingly rebuilt. Soon, It would be time to head home, to the welcoming warmth of her family, to Paul. And tomorrow, she would do it all again. The dinner service proceeded at a more leisurely pace than lunch, catering to couples seeking a quiet meal, families enjoying an evening out, and groups of friends catching up over shared plates. The lighting, slightly dimmed, created a cozier ambiance, and the clatter from the kitchen was less intense. Susan supervised the service, ensuring quality and consistency, but also spent more time having brief chats with regular patrons, inquiring about their families, or recommending a particular wine pairing. Megan handled the front of house management with her usual cheerful efficiency, while Maya, the new server, moved with growing confidence, her initial nervousness replaced by focused attentiveness. Susan watched her handle a slightly complicated split bill request with minimal assistance, feeling a quiet satisfaction at young woman's progress in just one day. As the last tables began to finish their meals around 9 p.m., the staff commenced closing procedures. The kitchen team meticulously cleaned their stations, the sounds shifting from the sizzle of woks to the methodical scrubbing of surfaces. Maya wiped down tables and reset them for the next day, while Megan reconciled the day's takings at the register. Susan did a final walkthrough of the kitchen, checking stock levels, ensuring everything was properly stored, and thanking the chefs for their hard work. She paused beside Megan at the counter. "Good day," Megan said, looking up from her calculations with a tired but satisfied smile. Takings are up slightly from last Tuesday, and Maya did pretty well once she found her feet. She did, Susan agreed. She just needed a little encouragement. Thanks for managing things so well, Megan, especially while I took that break. Hey, partners have to look out for each other. Megan shrugged, though her eyes were warm. Besides, Paul would have my hide if I let you overwork yourself. Susan chuckled. He probably would. She gathered her bag and keys. All right, I'm heading off. You'll lock up? Yep. See you tomorrow. Get some rest. You too. Waving goodbye to the remaining staff, Susan stepped out into the cool night air. The streets were quieter now, the earlier bustle replaced by the softer sounds of a city settling down. She unlocked her trusty scooter. She still hadn't bought a car, preferring the scooter's agility for navigating traffic, despite Paul's gentle suggestions. The familiar weight of it felt solid as she swung her leg over and started the engine. The ride home was peaceful. Streetlights cast long shadows, shops were shuttered, and the air felt fresh after the day's heat. Susan drove at a comfortable pace, letting her mind unwind. She replayed moments from the day, the satisfying clink of coins in the till, the taste of the new dessert, Maya's growing confidence, the warmth from Paul's brief text. Small victories, small joys. She thought of the contrast between this tired contentment and the gnawing exhaustion she used to feel returning home after long hours at the stall, only to face Mark's indifference or subtle criticisms, the endless household chores still waiting, the sense of carrying the world alone. Now, she was heading home to a haven, to warmth, to partnership, to shared responsibilities, to love. The difference was profound. Turning onto her street, she saw the lights of their home glowing warmly. Parking the scooter in its usual spot under the carport, she could hear faint sounds from within, the muffled television perhaps, or quiet conversation. She let herself in quietly, slipping off her shoes at the door. The living room was softly lit. Ben was sprawled on the floor, engrossed in a video game, headphones clamped over his ears. Susie was curled up on the sofa, reading a thick novel, occasionally reaching out to stroke the family's lazy tabby cat, who was asleep beside her. Mark's mother was likely already in her downstairs room. From the direction of the kitchen, she heard Paul's low voice and Lily's occasional responses. She walked towards the sound, her footsteps light on the tiled floor. Paul was at the kitchen table, helping Lily review a diagram for her science project, a model of the solar system spread out between them. He looked up as Susan entered, his face breaking into a warm smile that instantly melted away, the last vestiges of her workday fatigue. "Hey, you," he greeted softly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Long day?" "Productive," Susan replied, walking over and leaning down to kiss the top of his head. She ruffled Lily's hair. "Still at this?" Lily looked up, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Almost done. Paul's helping me figure out the asteroid belt placement." "Dad's a good explainer," Susie added from the living room doorway, having looked up from her book. "Just trying to keep up," Paul said modestly, though his eyes shone with quiet pride at the children's easy acceptance of his help. He reached out and took Susan's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Everything okay at the restaurant?" "All good," Susan assured him, squeezing his hand. "Just tired." "Sit down for a bit," he urged, pulling out the chair beside him. "Lily and I are almost finished." Susan sank into the chair, letting out a contented sigh. She watched Paul patiently explain something about orbital mechanics to Lily, saw Ben give a casual wave from the living room without taking his eyes off his game, felt the comfortable weight of Paul's hand holding hers. This was home, not just the physical building, but this feeling, this intricate, resilient, loving network of connections. The noise, the demands, the occasional echoes of the past, they all faded into the background, replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of belonging, the gentle harmony of her new life. Life settled into a comfortable, fulfilling pattern. Days were filled with the purposeful demands of work and family, evenings with shared meals, homework help, quiet conversations, and the easy companionship that had become the hallmark of Susan and Paul's relationship. One evening, after the younger children were in bed, and Lily was finishing homework in her room, Susan and Paul sat on their small balcony, overlooking their garden. The air was mild, fragrant with the night-blooming jasmine Mark's mother had planted. Paul was sketching ideas for a new fitness challenge banner for the gym, while Susan reviewed supplier invoices for the restaurant. "Megan thinks we should look into adding a dedicated vegetarian section to the menu," Susan mused aloud, tapping her pen against an invoice. "The demand is definitely growing, but it means different sourcing, potentially another prep area." Paul looked up from his sketchbook. "Makes sense from a business perspective. What are the challenges?" Susan detailed the logistical hurdles: kitchen space, staff training, ensuring no cross-contamination for strict vegetarians. Paul listened intently, asking clarifying questions. He didn't offer easy solutions, but helped her talk through the pros and cons, his calm logic acting as a sounding board. "Maybe start small," he suggested. "Introduce 3 or 4 vegetarian specials first, see how they sell, gauge the impact on workflow before committing to a full menu section." "That's a good idea," Susan nodded thoughtfully. "Less initial risk." She smiled at him. "Thanks. Sometimes just talking it through helps." "Always," he replied, reaching over to give her shoulder a light squeeze. "That's what partners are for." He paused, then added, "Speaking of plans, Susie mentioned wanting to go to the beach during the next school break. What do you think? A few days in Seaside Haven, maybe? All of us?" Susan's eyes lit up. A family vacation. They hadn't had a proper one since they'd married, life always seeming too busy. "Oh, Paul, the kids would love that. Mark's mother, too, perhaps." "We could ask her," Paul agreed. "A change of scenery might do her good. We could look into a house rental near the ocean." They spent the next half hour happily discussing potential vacation plans, dreaming of sandy beaches and fresh seafood, the mundane paperwork and gym banners forgotten. It was these moments, planning a shared future, however big or small, that cemented the foundation of their life together. It wasn't just about navigating the present, it was about building for tomorrow, together. Later, as they were getting ready for bed, Susan caught her reflection in the wardrobe mirror. She still wasn't the slender girl Mark had married, nor the idealized, glamorous figure he'd later craved. But the face that looked back at her was serene, content. The lines were testaments to laughter and resilience, not just stress and sorrow. Paul came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his voice soft against her ear. "Just how far we've come," Susan whispered, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "How different things are." "Good different, I hope," he said, his arms tightening slightly. "Very good different," she confirmed, turning in his arms to face him. "Thank you, Paul, for seeing me, for waiting for me, for building this with me." He tipped her chin up, his expression tender. "There was never anyone else I wanted to build it with, Susan." He kissed her, a slow, deep kiss filled with the quiet passion and profound tenderness that defined their love. It wasn't the blazing, uncertain spark of youthful romance, but the warm, steady glow of a hearth fire, offering light and comfort, built to last. A few weeks later, news of Mark filtered through via Megan, who had heard it from a distant relative. Nina, after struggling financially and finding single motherhood combined with Mark's dimming prospects less appealing than she'd imagined, had left him. She had reportedly moved back in with her parents in another state, taking their young son with her. Mark was alone, living in a small rented room, working a dead-end sales job, apparently saddled with debts incurred during his time with Nina. Megan relayed the news with a mixture of sympathy and "I told you so" vindication. Susan listened quietly, a complex swirl of emotions passing through her, a faint residue of pity for the man he had become, a validation of her own choices, but mostly a profound sense of detachment. His life, his struggles, were no longer tied to hers. His choices had led him down a path far removed from the sunlit kitchen where her own family was thriving. She felt no schadenfreude, no triumph. There was no satisfaction in his misfortune, only a quiet confirmation that chasing illusions rarely led to happiness, and that true richness lay not in status or fleeting passions, but in integrity, resilience, and the love you cultivate, day by day. That weekend, when Mark arrived to pick up Ben for their scheduled outing, which had become more regular recently, perhaps out of loneliness, he looked visibly diminished. His clothes were less sharp, his shoulders slightly slumped, the old arrogance replaced by a weary air. He was polite, almost deferential, as he greeted Susan and Paul at the door. Ben, sensing the shift, treated his father with a gentle kindness that surprised Susan. He wasn't prying, but he made easier conversation than usual, filling the awkward silences with stories about school and soccer, perhaps unconsciously trying to bridge the gap left by his father's obvious sadness. As they were leaving, Mark paused and looked back at Susan, standing in the doorway with Paul's arm resting lightly around her waist. There was a flash of deep, unmistakable regret in his eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the world he had lost. He gave a small nod, then turned and walked away with his son. Susan watched them go, then leaned back slightly against Paul. He squeezed her waist gently. No words were needed. They both understood the unspoken narratives playing out, the echoes of past choices reverberating into the present. But those echoes could not disturb the peace they had built. Life continued its steady, pleasant cadence. Lily navigated the dramas of high school friendships with increasing maturity, often seeking Susan's counsel. Ben discovered a passion for coding, spending happy hours engrossed in creating simple computer games on the family PC, with Paul patiently helping him debug. Susie blossomed, becoming more outgoing, her artistic talents encouraged by both Paul and Susan. Mark's mother remained the venerable matriarch of the household, dispensing wisdom, herbs, and unconditional love in equal measure. The restaurant flourished, earning accolades not just for its food but for its warm atmosphere. The gym thrived under Paul's dedicated management. Their planned family trip to Seaside Haven was a resounding success, filled with sunshine, laughter, salty air, and the creation of shared memories that further strengthened their bonds. One ordinary Tuesday evening, Susan found herself alone in the kitchen for a few moments. Dinner was done, the children were occupied with homework or hobbies, Paul was on a late call with a gym supplier, and Mark's mother was watching her favorite soap opera. Rain pattered softly against the window panes, a gentle, soothing sound. Susan stood by the sink, looking out at the dark garden, glistening under the streetlights. She wasn't thinking of the past, nor particularly planning for the future. She was simply present, feeling the quiet hum of the house around her, the sense of interwoven lives, of deeply set roots. She thought of the journey, the devastation of betrayal, the painful rebuilding, the unexpected gift of Paul's love, the demanding but rewarding work of blending a family and nurturing her business. It hadn't been easy. There were scars, reminders of storms weathered. But the scars hadn't broken her. In their own way, they had made her stronger, more compassionate, more grateful for the simple, profound beauty of the life she now lived. The sharp sting of Mark's betrayal had long since faded, replaced by the steady warmth of Paul's hand in hers. The insecurity she'd felt looking in the mirror had been overwritten by a quiet confidence born of self-acceptance and accomplishment. The frantic scramble for survival had transformed into the purposeful rhythm of a fulfilling life. Paul finished his call and came into the kitchen, wrapping his arms around her from behind, just as he had countless times before. His familiar scent, the solid feel of his embrace, was an anchor. "Everything okay?" he murmured into her hair. Susan leaned back against him, closing her eyes for a moment, breathing in the peace of the moment, the wholeness of her present. "Everything," she whispered, her voice full of quiet certainty, "is perfect." It wasn't a Hollywood ending. It was something better. It was real. It was hers. And it was more than enough. The symphony, once discordant with pain, now played a melody of quiet joy, resilience, and enduring love.